Chapter 14. Theo. Fine, Del spat, breaking the silence between us. Keep them. Enjoy them. Wear them for all I care. I laughed as she spun around to start unloading her car. I only foresee 2 out of those 3 things happening, I said as I walked around to the passenger side. Is this all coming with you? Yes. Why? She gritted out as she wrestled with her guitar case. I chuckled again as I shook my head. Mason's just gonna have a heart attack. Why? She asked again as she unlocked the trunk and exposed the rest of her things. Let's just say we haven't gone on the road with a woman in a while. I'll bet he's forgotten how much shit y'all travel with. Del huffed and puffed as she yanked an oversized suitcase out of the car. I only have 1 bag for clothes, 1 bag for shoes, and 1 bag for toiletries. That's hardly anything. I snorted as I pulled her amp out of the back seat and set it beside her. Growing pile of crap. I don't think he'll agree. She rolled her eyes, ready to argue some more, but her phone chimed and interrupted. When she pulled it out, her face tightened with anger before she stuffed it back in her pocket. I had no right to ask her anything, but I desperately wanted to know who'd just texted her and why it made her so mad. Hell, I wanted to know everything about her. That was Abraham, she said, ending my internal struggle. What did he say? She shrugged as she pulled a backpack onto her shoulders and filled her hands with anything else she could reach. I don't know and I don't care. A text is not gonna make up for what he said yesterday, so I'm not wasting my time on it. I snatched up the heaviest bags before she could, ignoring the glare I got for my efforts. What if it's a text to skin if he can call you to apologize? Del shot me a look over her shoulder as we crunched our way through the lot. Since when are you on his team? Never. I'm on team whatever makes Del happiest, and fighting with your brother ain't it? She spun back around with a huff, but I didn't miss the way her cheeks darkened with a blush. I don't want to talk about him. We don't have to. I just think you should at least look at his text. She turned back with a glare so vicious I rushed to add, not now. Or even today. If you don't want. I just mean like eventually. She watched me for another moment before turning back around again. I'll think about it. Figuring that was as good as I was going to get, I dropped it. Which was good. Since we weren't alone for long. Hey Del. Hey Theo. Morning Mason, Del said, her voice so sunny and charming it pissed me off that it was directed at someone else. Did you two just get here? Roman added. I knew what he really meant. He wanted to know if we just arrived together, and so far the evidence was pretty damning. But I was smarter than that. Nah, I got here a while ago, I said with a nod toward my giant duffel bag. Already beneath the bus. I'd made sure to stow it before going to look for Del, so I had proof we weren't together. Roman narrowed his eyes at me as he took a sip of his coffee. I chose to ignore him as I got Del's stuff loaded. That's a lot of stuff you have there, Mason said, the strain obvious in his voice. I chuckled and Del turned to glare at me before looking back at my manager with that gorgeous smile. I only brought the basics, I promise. Do you think we can fit it all? She asked, her tone so sugar-sweet I knew the man would cave. Of course, Mason said predictably. We'll figure it out. Del's smile grew, and it made my hands tremble. I didn't know how Mason was still standing. Oh, he said as he pulled his phone out of his slacks. Let me make sure I have your number and give you mine in case you need it. Del retrieved her cell as Declan's voice boomed out of nowhere. Hey, I want Del's number too. The blonde-haired rhythm guitarist leapt off the bus and raced over to Del and Mason, his phone held out. Del giggled and took it, presumably adding her number to his phone book. I stood there, hands fisted at my sides as I warred with what to do. Jealousy burned through my veins as I watched her casually interact with Mason and Declan. I wanted to be the one she was looking at. I wanted to be the one making her giggle. Finally, all reason disappeared at once and I fished out my cell. I should get your number too, I said as I approached them. Del shot me a brief look I had no trouble interpreting, but I handed my phone over anyway. Sure, she said, although she sounded anything but. We'll take your number too, Sawyer called as he walked up with his brother, Walker. Del was back to smiling as she entered her number into phone after phone. When she was done, she lifted her head and looked around. Do you want to exchange numbers too, Roman? She asked. I froze in place. Only my gut continued to churn as I waited to see what this Asshole had to say. I swore to myself I'd break his nose if he was mean to her. I'm good, he replied before taking another sip of coffee. It wasn't rude, but it wasn't nice either, and I was about to teach him a fucking lesson when Del spoke up again. Suit yourself, but you're missing out on having my number in your phone. Am I? He said, his tone bored. Yep, Del continued like he wasn't being a dick. I know how to fix a flat. I'm great with pop culture trivia, and I always reply even to 2 a.m. drunken texts. I bit my lip to hold back my laughter, but Declan didn't bother. He bent in, half arms wrapped around his waist, his loud laugh bouncing off the buildings. In the nearly deserted street. Pop culture trivia, Declan muttered as he pulled himself together. He reached up to wipe a tear out of his eye as he wrapped an arm around Del's shoulders. I like you so much better than our other opening act already. Who's the other opener? She asked as he led her toward the bus door. Declan shrugged. Some cowboy from Nashville we paired up with at the beginning of the tour. He rides on the other bus with the roadies so we don't have to travel with any humans. That makes sense, she said before she started climbing the stairs, and Declan had to get his goddamn arm off her. My hand connected with the back of his head as soon as I caught up to them and found him staring at her ass. He turned to me with a frown, but I just muscled past him to climb onto the bus behind her. Wow, this is amazing, she said as she slowly spun around. I watched her as I fought with the stupid smile on my face and thought about what else I could show her that would make her this happy. Yeah, we upgraded for this tour, Declan said as he climbed onto the bus. Behind me, the roadies have our old bus. Are we the only werewolves on tour? Del asked. Yeah, I cut in. Us and the driver. We try to hire werewolves when we can, but most prefer to stay on Packlands and not tour the country for months like we do. Del's eyes clouded over with an emotion I couldn't name before she looked away. Yeah, I get that. Her voice was sad, and although I had a hunch I knew why, I couldn't do anything about it. My hands itched with the need to reach for her, and I actually took one whole step in her direction before Mason's loud-ass voice snapped me out of my trance. All right, is everyone on the bus? I've got breakfast here and we're leaving in a minute. We should get to Raleigh by noon, which will give you some time for lunch before your radio interview at 1. From there we go straight to the venue for soundcheck. After that, y'all can do what you do until showtime. Any questions? It was like I could hear the gears turning in Del's head before she finally spoke up. I'm assuming I'm not a part of the radio interview. Mason turned to her with a smile I wanted to punch off his face. Not this one. Maybe in the future though. Why don't you grab a sandwich and a coffee? And I'll show you to your room? We can go over your contract while we're back there. She agreed, and I stood there, helpless to stop them as they walked away. Everything inside me screamed to go back there too. That they shouldn't be alone together. That I needed to assert my claim over her. But that last thought brought me up short. Del wasn't mine. I didn't own her. Hell, I'd only known her for 2 days. Hey Moore, you want to work on that song we started in Charleston? With great effort, I turned away from Del and Mason's retreating backs to look at Roman. You know what? I had something new in mind. Let me show you what I've got so far. Are you ready? Del jumped and spun away from her mirror to look at me with wide eyes. Theo, what the hell did I tell you about that ninja shit? I laughed and stepped into her dressing room. It had been hours since I'd gotten to be in her presence, and I was soaking it up. First, I'd had to leave her to go to the stupid radio interview, and then we'd had to race back for soundcheck right after that. I should have had time to find her afterward, but my needy-ass bandmates hadn't left me alone in hours. I just finally escaped for a few minutes to use the bathroom and decided to find Del instead. Sorry, I said. I just wanted to check in before you go on stage. She blew out a deep breath and turned back to the mirror. I watched, fascinated, as she lifted a little red wand and painted her lips with it. Well, thanks for that, I guess. Although I could do without the heart attack. I chuckled again as I left the door open behind me and took a seat. Although it wasn't possible for me to completely keep my distance from her, at least an open door should prove we weren't up to anything inappropriate. At least on the outside. But in my head, I'd ripped the sparkly shirt off her body a dozen times already. I cleared my throat, hoping it could help my hazy brain too. So do you know what you're singing tonight? Or are we just winging it again? She turned to me with her lips pursed. I only wing it for auditions. Oh, so when it really counts? Exactly. I laughed again, which earned me a smile that made my heart trip over itself. For a moment. So what's your set looking like? She sighed. Well, okay, so I haven't figured out everything yet. I snorted, and she shot me a look that only made me laugh harder. Of course. You haven't. Del's head fell back with an exaggerated huff, and all I wanted to do was run my fingers through her silky brown hair. It's just that my first song always sets the mood for the night. I usually do a cover of whatever I'm feeling that day, but nothing's coming to me yet. Can I help? She turned to me with a smile that made my heart pound. Can you inspire me? I was on my feet in a flash. Say the word, darlin'. We stood there, separated by just a few feet that were so charged with energy. The hairs on my arms stood up straight. I could see in her eyes that she was as done with me as I was with her, which was not at all. My feet moved without my permission, but I only got to take one step before we were interrupted. Hey, Del, came the man's voice with a knock on the doorframe. I'm Larry. Work with Mason. Just coming in to let you know you're on in 5. I fisted my hands to prevent them from reaching out and throttling my manager's assistant. Finding humans that didn't ask too many questions was hard, and I knew Mason would be pissed if I broke his neck. But still the urge was there. Hey, Larry. Nice to meet you, Del said as she crossed the room to greet him. He stood there with his jaw on the ground for a moment before finally snapping out of it and stumbling a step forward. Hi, Delaware. I'm Larry. I snorted, even though I kind of felt bad for the man. Del was a lot for anyone to handle, and poor Larry never stood a chance. She giggled, and Larry's eyes glazed over. It's nice to meet you, Del said. Again as she reached out to shake his hand. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3 Mississippi. 4 Mississippi. I was just about to break his arm in half when Del finally retracted her hand and took a step back. She shot me a quick, curious glance that I ignored. Yeah, I'll be ready in 5. Thanks. Larry nodded slowly before he shook his head and cleared his throat. Do you know your way around backstage? I can wait and show you where to go when you're ready. You know what? That would be GR. I'll show her, I said, my voice loud enough to drown out Del's. I'm sure. Mason's got something else for you to do, I continued at a more normal volume, making sure to bring up his boss so he'd get the fucking hint. Larry's eyes bounced back and forth between me and Del a few times, and it looked like he wanted to say something but finally shook his head. Fine, he gritted out before turning to Del and smiling. Good luck out there tonight. Thanks, Larry, she said with a grin. The asshole stood there a second longer than necessary before finally turning and disappearing through the door. My jaw was still clenched tight when Del stepped up beside me. You ready? She asked, her guitar case in hand. The tension in my shoulders melted away as I snorted. Am I ready? I already know what I'm playing tonight. Can you say the same? She pressed her lips together and shook her head. Not yet. I scoffed as I placed a hand on her back and led us out of the room. Let's narrow it down. Del sighed. Okay, well, Taylor Swift is like my good luck charm, so I feel like I should start with one of her songs. Okay, good. Which one? She turned to me with an incredulous look. Which one? The woman has over 100 songs released. This could take all night. I shook my head as I stopped us at the edge of the stage. You don't have all night. You need to get out there. She blew out a breath and shook her head, obviously still struggling with this opening song. I glanced around us to see we were relatively alone before taking a step closer. How about some of that inspiration you were looking for earlier? Del glanced up at me, her blue eyes swimming with the kind of desire she couldn't hide. Inspiration. I shrugged. Yeah, we could call it that. Or we could call it a good luck kiss. Either works for me. She rolled her eyes. Is this good luck for me or for you? Fuck. She didn't say no. I took another step closer, her scent making it even harder to think. I think it works both ways if you're doing it right. Del held my gaze, even as a massive shiver made her whole body tremble. She blew out a deep breath and smiled. I don't think so, handsome. But I know what I'm singing now. She grabbed her guitar and strung it around her neck as she walked out on stage. When she reached the microphone, she smiled at the crowd, and I wished I was out there to see it. Hey y'all. Thanks for being here. My name's Del McCoy and this is Sparks. Fly. She launched right into the song, and I hung on every note she sang. I did my best to not read into the lyrics too much, but I couldn't help it. Despite my best efforts, the only thought that kept running through my head was, goddamn, I hope she's singing about me. Chapter 15. Del. Thanks y'all. Have a good night, Raleigh. I yelled before I put my guitar down and practically danced off stage. Every moment of my performance had been perfect. I hadn't skipped a beat or missed a single note. The crowd was lively and just the right amount of intoxicated to have fun with me. Even now they were still chanting my name. Del. 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 I felt so alive, so powerful. It was like I could do absolutely anything. Pure lightning was zipping through my veins and there was nothing out of my reach. Del. This time my name was called from much closer, and the voice was one-eyed. Recognize anywhere. I turned just in time to find Theo rushing forward to pull me into his arms. He spun me around and around until a laugh burst out of me. Holy shit, he said before he set me down and used both hands to cup my face. You were fucking incredible. Theo's hands on my skin were gently electrocuting me, charging my already racing heart and filling me to the brim with some kind of reckless emotion I couldn't name. That was the only excuse I had for what happened next. I grabbed 2 fistfuls of his dark hair and dragged his lips to mine. Theo was shocked still for only a moment before he pulled me closer and deepened the kiss. We stood there wrapped around each other for so long time and space ceased to mean anything. His hair was soft beneath my fingers, and his mouth tasted like hops as I breathed him in. It almost felt like I could feel him burrowing into my bones, like he was marking me permanently. It wasn't until someone cleared their throat from nearby that we finally broke apart. The moment his lips left mine, all that common sense I'd been missing rushed back in and I took a big step back. Theo, the guys were looking for you, Mason said, his voice subdued. You're on soon. I couldn't meet his gaze, but I felt Theo's eyes on me burning through my skin before he finally turned away. Okay, I'll go find them, he finally said, his deep voice still sending a shiver down my spine no matter how hard I fought against it. He seemed reluctant to walk away, but finally did, leaving me alone with Mason. The manager sighed and ran a hand through his light brown hair. Listen, I don't agree with Roman's delivery, but he's right. We don't allow people to date on tour. My insides twisted as I nodded, barely able to meet his eyes. I know, I get it. I just can't afford to have any more setbacks. We can't take the chance that in a week or 2 you guys won't be able to be in the same room together. I nodded again. Yeah, I know. You're right. It won't happen again. Mason sighed again. I'll be honest, Delaware. We were lucky as hell to find you. Haven't seen an opener work a crowd like that in a long time. I don't want to have to send you home. My stomach cramped so hard I thought I'd be sick. I could feel this opportunity slipping through my fingers, even as my knees still shook from the power of Theo's kiss. There was a choice to be made here and only one acceptable answer. You won't have to send me home, I promised him. I'll keep my distance from now on. Mason shook his head. Y'all are living on the same bus, Delaware. How are you gonna do that? My blood pressure skyrocketed as I heard the doubt in his voice. I hadn't realized how close he was to actually kicking me off the tour. This was just something fun. We both have plenty of other options to keep us busy. Even as I said those words, I knew I didn't want anyone else. But Theo was off the menu now, and I needed to find something else to order. Unfortunately, I had a feeling I'd wind up fasting instead. Mason eyed me carefully. Are you sure? I'd rather get ahead of this problem now if we have to. Yes, I'm positive. There's no problem. He blew out a deep breath and nodded. Okay, good. His stern face melted into a grin that reminded me just how handsome he was. Great job out there, by the way. I was really impressed. I smiled wide. Thanks. He nodded, but it was clear his attention was already on the ringing phone in his pocket. Excuse me, he muttered. No worries. I was gonna go get a drink anyway. Mason nodded again. Okay, have fun. Make sure you're on the bus by 2. Because we're leaving for Richmond. Got it, I said, but he'd already turned away to answer his phone. I used that moment alone to take a deep breath and center myself. That had been one of the best shows of my life, followed by one of the most powerful kisses of my life. And it all ended with the threat of losing one because of the other. Abraham's words floated through my head, razor sharp and crystal clear. My hands fisted as tight as the knot in my stomach. I refused to prove him right. I refused to fail at this. No matter what it took, I was finishing this tour and I was going to kill it every single night. Hey Del. Great show, Larry said as he walked up to me. Thanks, I said with a smile. Hey, would you mind putting my guitar in my dressing room for me? I asked with a nod behind me toward the stage. I wanted to go have a drink. And I don't want to run into Theo again. Of course, he said with a wave. It'll be there waiting for you. I reached out and gave his arm a squeeze as I walked by. Thanks, Larry. The venue was more packed than I'd realized from the stage, and it took me 20 minutes to get a bartender's attention. When I did, I ordered a gin and tonic, knowing my usual vodka Red Bull would do nothing but make me more jittery. I just received my drink when the lights went low, and the crowd roared. Most of the people around the bar surged toward the stage, so I had my choice of stools. I got comfortable sipping on my drink as the guys walked on stage and the venue went wild. My heart raced as Theo took his place and started strumming his guitar. Raleigh, Roman yelled into his mic, "What the fuck is up?" They all yelled louder and Roman smiled. "We're Faze," he said, and the whole crowd screamed. "And this is Don't You Wanna." The music picked up as the lights got brighter and Roman started singing. His voice was strong and smoky in all the right ways, but it was Theo I was listening for. He had a mic set up in front of him, and every once in a while, he'd lean in and sing a few words with Roman. I sat perched on the edge of my chair, waiting to hear him alone, waiting to see if I recognized his singing like I recognized his talking, if it would speak to me on the same level. They finished their first song, and I clapped along with everyone else. Wow, I whispered, and just like I'd yelled his name, Theo's head snapped in my direction. I sat there holding my breath as he seemed to stare right through me. He started playing the next song, but his eyes never left mine. Hey, you're Del McCoy, right? I ripped my gaze away from Theo to look at the guy who just sat down next to me. He was probably in his mid-20s and could use a haircut, but he was kinda cute in that eager puppy dog way. I had a feeling I knew where this conversation was going. I shot one more glance toward Theo, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. Hey. Yeah, I'm Delaware. What's your name? His pale blue eyes lit up. I'm Brian. You were great tonight. My smile widened. Thanks so much. Are you from around here? Yeah, I'm from Raleigh. I've actually been to one of your shows before. Was a couple years ago at the Blue Vest Amphitheater. Oh my gosh, yeah. That was the Carolina Country Summer Tour. That was a blast. You were amazing then, but you've only gotten better. Especially your original stuff. My heart warmed in my chest. Ah, thank you. You're so sweet. He just continued to smile at me, and I wondered how many beers he'd had before the one in his hand. I took an awkward sip of my drink as I waited for him to say something or make an excuse to leave. Truthfully, I was hoping for the latter. The music wound down, and another song started to play before he finally broke the silence. Do you really write all your own music? I didn't know whether to be flattered that he seemed impressed or insulted, because he also sounded a little surprised. My jaw was clenched tight, but I answered as calmly as I could. Yeah, I do. Also run a songwriting workshop back in Asheville. Brian's bloodshot eyes widened. That's amazing. How'd you get into that? Now this was something I didn't mind talking about. Poor Brian didn't know what he was getting himself into by asking that question. I took a deep breath and launched into what my siblings called my women in music spiel. Courting. To them, I'd given this speech at least 1,000 times, but it looked like it was about to be 1,001. The poor guy seemed enthralled, if a little confused, and I hoped that had more to do with his blood alcohol level than me. I was just about to get into some of the finer details when the loud chanting caught my attention. We want more. We want more. Truthfully, I'd been happy to lose myself in this conversation with Brian, because it distracted me from Theo. I didn't want to sit there and watch him all night knowing I couldn't have him. I didn't want to risk getting trapped in his gaze again when I couldn't go there anymore. But now that I was tuned back in, I realized they weren't screaming for more. They were screaming for more. As in Theo more. My heart sank in my chest as I reluctantly dragged my gaze to the stage and found him standing there smiling at the crowd, his fingers absent-mindedly picking at the strings of his guitar. We want more. We want more. Theo's smile grew as he shook his head and looked down to concentrate on playing. We want more. We want more. The crowd was almost deafening as they screamed for Theo, and he pretended not to hear them. Finally, he looked up and shook his head before pulling the guitar off and setting it down. The venue's volume somehow ratcheted higher as Theo grabbed the hem of his t-shirt and pulled it over his head. My mouth went dry as he tossed it aside and picked his guitar back up. His chest was toned and lean and I couldn't stop thinking about the hours I'd spent running my hands across it. The wolf tattoos on his biceps rippled as Theo leaned into the microphone. Is this what y'all wanted? More screams, more whistles, more heartbeats racing and pheromones leaking from every corner of the place. He chuckled. All right, you win. This is what about tonight. Brian leaned in to say something to me, but I couldn't hear anything but Theo's deep raspy voice. The people around us were still yelling, but none of that mattered either. Theo was singing, and it felt like I waited my whole life to hear him. I'd been paying more attention to the notes he was hitting than the words he was singing, but when I finally tuned back in I wished I'd been listening from the beginning. What about me? What about you? What about all the things we were supposed to do? What if you're the one? What if I was right? What about tonight? The lyrics were simple but strung together in that way and sang by his voice. They hit a note I hadn't been expecting. My heart fluttered in the back of my throat as he swung his hazel eyes my way. All right, he said, interrupting the song right before the climax. I want everyone on their feet with their phones flash on. Right now. I sat there frozen for a moment, his penetrating gaze pinning me to my seat. Everyone, he said again. Now. I slid off the stool onto my shaking legs and Theo smiled before he looked down at his fingers playing the guitar again. Y'all ready to sing with me? He asked, his voice so deep and melodic it sent a shiver down my spine. Get those phones in the air, he yelled before the band picked back up and he started to sing again. What about us? What about just your heartbeat and my hopes and dreams? What if you're the one? What if I was right? What about tonight? I didn't know this song, but I knew exactly what he was saying. Knew with every fiber of my being he was singing to me. I stood there with my heart thumping in the back of my throat and a knot in my stomach so tight I couldn't breathe. How was I supposed to stay away from this man for 8 weeks? How was I supposed to stare into his deep hazel eyes and just walk away? But how could I afford not to? The song ended, and I was finally released from his hold. I took what felt like my first breath in hours as Brian's voice penetrated the haze in my head. Going to the meet and greet? I shook my head and turned to him with a smile I hoped looked at least a little sorry. What was that? Me and my buddy have tickets for the meet and greet. Are you gonna be there? Oh, yeah, I guess. Not like I had anything else to do. Even this one drink was a frivolous expense I couldn't really afford right now. Brian smiled wide. Okay, great. I'll see you there. He walked off just as Roman stepped up to the mic. That's it for us, Raleigh. Thanks for comin'. I watched Theo and the rest of the band walk off stage as my stomach twisted uncomfortably. There was this voice deep down inside of me that said I didn't want to go to that meet and greet, that nothing good would happen there and I'd regret going. Too bad I had a habit of making dumb. Chapter 16. Theo. Hey man. What the fuck was that? I dragged my shirt across my sweaty forehead, stalling for time before I turned to Roman. I dunno, I said with a shrug. I was just feeling this tonight. Roman's eyes almost bugged out of his head. You were feeling it? That's your excuse for changing our set list midway through the show, he yelled. It's not a big deal, Roman, Declan said, clapping him on the shoulder as he walked past. We all know that song well enough that we didn't need to practice it. That's not the goddamn point. It's Theo's solo. He should get to sing what he wants, Sawyer added as he took a seat on the leather couch in a corner of the VIP room. He had a girl back home, so he tried to stay on the outskirts of our meet and greets. It's not Theo's song, it's our song, and we shouldn't have to be blindsided like that. What the fuck? Incoming. Mason's voice drowned out Roman's rant as he led in a group of fans. Like a switch had been flicked, we all put on our happy faces and got to work. It was important that these people had a good time with us because no one wanted to pay to have a shitty experience. Most of the women crowded around Roman, but predictably there was at least one who thought they'd have a better shot with the lead guitarist. Theo! Someone squealed, and it seemed to echo through the room. I turned to find a top-heavy brunette shuffling toward me on a set of ankle-breaking heels. She was flanked by two other equally made-up groupies, and I worked to keep the smile on my face. I hated to think of them like that, like they were just overeager fans when I knew they were also sisters and daughters and nieces. They weren't just the heavy makeup or skimpy clothes they wore. But damn, sometimes it felt like that's all they wanted to be known for. Hey girls, I said as they got closer, reaching out to hug them all. How'd y'all like the show? Oh my god! The head groupie squealed as she launched into a highlight reel of the performance I just gave. I kept the smile plastered on my face and my gaze locked on her and her friends, but every other sense was looking out for the one woman I actually wanted to talk to. I didn't know if Del had any intention of showing up to this meet and greet, but a guy could hope. And oh my god, I swear I almost had a heart attack when you started singing. What about tonight? I haven't heard you do that song in so long. That electric buzz I'd almost gotten used to ran through my body, and I knew Del was close. I was more focused on that than the conversation I was supposed to be having, and tuned in a few seconds too late. Theo. I shook my head and focused on the women in front of me again. I'm sorry. What was that? I asked with the most charming smile I could muster. Her eyes widened slightly, and the only reason I knew she was blushing underneath all that makeup was because her neck turned red. I was just telling you how amazing you were tonight. I stretched my grin wider. Thanks, sweetheart. She just blinked slowly for a moment before shaking her head. What made you want to sing that song tonight? Del. It was like someone else had answered the question for me. Of course, she was the reason for my change of heart. Just like she'd been the reason for everything else I'd done in the past 48 hours. I looked up to find who'd yelled her name and spotted a young guy with his arm in the air waving to her. As I watched, he motioned for the man next to him to follow as they walked across the room. My eyes followed their path until they found her. Del was standing in the doorway of the VIP room, looking like she wasn't sure she belonged. It made me want to storm over there and convince her she did. Hey Del, the guy said as he finally reached her. This is my buddy Dave. My eyes hadn't left Del, and I watched her smile at the first guy before her. Gaze settled on the second. Because I was paying such close attention, I caught the way her mouth tightened when she looked at him. I noticed her hands fisting at her sides while she subtly leaned away. Hey Brian, she finally said to the first man, completely ignoring the second. It's nice to see you again, Del, Dave said, and already there was a fire in my gut, burning at the familiar way he talked to her. You too. Even from across the room I could hear the insincerity. I'll catch you guys later, she said and turned to leave. Hey wait. My temper flared as Dave reached out and grabbed her arm. Where? You going so fast? I haven't seen you in years, he said, his smile making me want to punch him. There's a reason for that, Del spat, her eyes blazing as she struggled to get out of Dave's grasp. I knew she wasn't actually struggling and that she could snap his arm in half with very little effort if she wanted. Problem was, if this guy was really holding on, she'd have to expose how strong she truly was in order to break free. Have you two met? Brian asked the obvious question. Yes, Del said with a grunt as she pulled at Dave's grip with her free hand. We met a long time ago. Oh, we did more than meet, baby girl. The violence in my head almost overwhelmed me, and I took a step in their direction before I even realized I was moving. Theo. I ignored the whiny, high-pitched voice, my whole focus on the conversation happening on the other side of the room. Don't go there, Dave, Del said, her voice still somehow lined with professionalism. I honestly couldn't believe she hadn't decked the guy yet. Come on, Dave groaned as he dragged her a step closer. You still mad after all this time? Let go of me, she said through gritted teeth. He laughed, and that was the end of my self-control. I pushed past the half-naked girls in my way and stormed across the room much faster than I should have. As soon as I was in reach, I grabbed the asshole by his collar and jerked him away. Hey, what the fuck? He yelled as Del gasped in surprise. The son of a bitch hadn't let her go, and she'd been dragged along with him. My limbs trembled with the need to shift and rip the bastard's throat out. Let her go, I snarled. Dave struggled in my grasp, but I wasn't even breaking a sweat. He still had a hold of Del though, so I shook him until he finally dropped her arm. She stumbled back a step, and I held my breath until she caught her balance. When I was sure she was good, I dragged Dave closer, my teeth gritted so hard. My jaw ached. Who gave you the right to lay your fucking hands on her? Dave swung at me, but I saw that shit coming a mile away and ducked with plenty of time. I shook him again until his eyes rattled in his head. Answer. Me, I roared. Theo. Mason yelled as he joined us. Put him down. You need to mind your fucking business, Dave gasped as I tightened his collar around his neck. She's my ex. I can touch her if I want. The rage was so swift it almost overcame me. Some must have leaked out though, because Dave's eyes got wide, and I had to force myself to stop squeezing him. You are not my ex, Del piped up. Shut the fuck up, bitch. Dave yelled back and I lost my fucking cool. With a growl I turned around and slammed him against the wall, creating a hole the size of his body. You don't fucking talk to her like that. Screamed in his face. Please, he said, his tone striving for nonchalant despite the fact his face was almost purple. That bitch can handle herself. She broke my fucking nose. The last time I saw her. I almost smiled at that news before Del spoke up from next to us again. You hit me first. My whole vision went blood red as my hand clamped down harder and I leaned in. Close. You hit her. It was a love tap. You hit me so hard I fell down the stairs. Del seethed. I looked away from Dave for a moment to focus on Delaware. Her body was shaking as hard as mine was, and I knew she was ready to tear him to pieces. But beneath, that was something else. Something bigger than just the physical pain he'd caused. This guy had hurt her deeper than that. The realization was like a knife to my gut, and for a moment I couldn't breathe around my anger. Theo, Mason said as he placed a hand on the arm still strangling the human. Let him go. I looked from my manager to Del and back again. There was nothing I wanted more than to rip this dickhead limb from limb, but at what cost? With so many witnesses, I'd definitely go to prison. That would ruin the band, end this tour, and leave my family with no way to support themselves. So, although I felt the wrongness to my core, I let go of Dave and watched as he fell to the ground. I took a step back, Mason's arm still on mine. Dave struggled to his feet, rubbing at his neck and coughing. When he finally pulled it together, he spat at my feet. Pussy. The rage was back, and this time there was no stopping it, but before I could even move a muscle, Del sprang out of nowhere. She cocked her little fist back and let it fly right into his nose. It broke with an audible snap and a burst of blood. Dave crumbled into a heap on the ground, and Del stood above him, breathing hard and still slightly shaking. Get the hell out of here and don't come back, she said, her voice so menacing it made my balls shrivel up inside my stomach, and it wasn't even directed at me. The piece of shit climbed to his feet again and turned to his friend. Let's fucking go. Brian shook his head. Nah, I'm good. Dave stood there for a moment before huffing and turning toward the door. Fuck this, he mumbled as he walked out, leaving tiny droplets of blood in his wake like a gory Hansel. We were all silent for a moment before Mason clapped his hands and turned to the small crowd. Well, sorry for that, folks. Why don't we all go get a drink? On me. The room erupted in cheers as people started filing out of the room. I wasn't interested in a free drink though. Hey, are you okay? I asked Del as I got close. She blew out a deep breath and shook her head. He didn't hurt me. That's not what I asked. Del finally looked up at me, her eyes still blazing with fury. In that case, not really. I took a step closer, the urge to touch her almost all-consuming. What can I do? She blew out another breath and closed her eyes for a moment. When she reopened them, they were much clearer. Can you go back in time and stop me from ever giving that guy my number? I grit my teeth at just the mention of her with another guy. No, I finally said. But I can help you forget him. Her blue eyes flared brighter as she took in a shaky breath. Theo. Her voice was stern, but I could see what I did to her, and it only made me want to see more. Hey, Del. Theo, are you guys coming to the bar? Mason asked as he popped up next to us. I turned to give him a glare, but Del immediately took a bunch of steps away and shook her head. I'm actually gonna head back to the bus. Y'all have fun. Without waiting for a reply, she spun on the heel of her cowboy boot and hustled out of the room. I watched the place where she disappeared from until Mason's loud sigh caught my attention. You know who's gonna suffer if you keep this up, right? My manager asked. his face looking more lined than it should at only 35. He kept talking without an answer from me. If you fuck up, you'll still have your spot in this band, but she'll have to go home. Is it really worth it? Mason didn't wait for my answer, leaving me in the empty VIP room with that one question repeating over and over again in my mind. Is it really worth it? Dell. Shit. Shit, 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 shit. I muttered as I walked as fast as I dared to my dressing room. I needed to grab my crap and get to my room on the bus as soon as possible. There had been way too many opportunities for me to get fired today, and I needed to go to bed before one actually worked. But come on. What were the friggin' odds I'd run into Dave all the way out here? Or that his friend would strike up a conversation with me at the bar. Wouldn't even have gone to that stupid meet and greet if I'd known he'd be there. I also would have done myself the favor of skipping it just so I didn't have to see all the tall, skinny women buzzing around Theo. That was what he was used to. The bleach blondes with too much makeup on and not enough clothes. The women who were all social media models and got paid to take vitamins. I looked down at my scuffed cowboy boots and shook my head. None of that mattered. I didn't need to be Theo's type. I just needed to do my job and mind my business. Hey, Delaware. My head snapped up to find Brian heading down the hall toward me. Hey, I said, barely keeping the grimace off my face. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about my buddy, he said as he came to a stop in front of me. If I'd known he was going to be a dick, I wouldn't have brought him. It's okay. You're not responsible for his actions. Yeah, but a pretty girl like you shouldn't have to deal with shit like that. I'm not sure what my looks had to do with it, but okay. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. He stood there smiling at me for a long moment before I cleared my throat. Okay, well, I need to get going. Thanks again for coming to the show. Brian shrugged. I'm a fan. I'd pay to see you play anywhere. You're sweet, I said as I reached out and squeezed his arm. Have a good night, I said as I made my escape. I finally made it to my dressing room and slammed the door shut behind me. The flimsy piece of wood wouldn't keep out a determined werewolf, but I had hope. Mason could keep Theo busy, at least until I had a chance to compose myself and fortify my defenses against him, which admittedly were weak at best. With a sigh, I pushed off the door and crossed the room to my stuff. I needed that bottle of water and snacks I'd packed myself for after the show, and to get Theo's taste out of my mouth. I didn't notice the folded up piece of paper until I reached for my bag, and it fell onto the floor. I scooped it up and frowned at it. Where the hell had this come from? My hands were already shaking because I had a feeling I knew what it was and who left it for me. I unfolded the piece of paper and pressed out the creases before reading it. Del, you were incredible tonight. I didn't miss a single note you sang for me. I closed my eyes and tried to take deep, even breaths in the hopes it would calm my racing heart. It wasn't signed, but there was no doubt who it was from. Theo knew I'd sang that song for him. He knew that every song I sang tonight was about him. I felt exposed and elated and so fucking torn as I clutched the note in my hand. No, I said out loud just so I could hear it. I couldn't do this with Theo. I couldn't lose this job. I needed the exposure. I needed the experience. I needed the money, and most of all, I needed to prove my brother wrong. This thing with Theo was supposed to have ended already, but we both fucked that up. I decided then that I needed to talk to him again. I needed to make him understand he couldn't look at me with those bedroom eyes and leave me sweet notes in my dressing room anymore. He needed to keep his distance, and I needed to focus on my job. With a nod in the mirror, I packed up my shit and got ready to leave. The last second, I grabbed his note off the table and shoved it in my bag. Rationalized that I didn't need anyone else finding it, but that wasn't the whole truth. I was saving the note because it was the only piece of him I was allowing myself to keep. I just had to hope it was enough. Chapter 17. Theo. Hey, where you going? Declan's voice froze me in place. I turned around and cleared my throat. I was gonna head back to the bus. He narrowed his eyes at me. It's not even midnight, and you haven't left to hide in the bathroom and get your dick sucked by a groupie yet. What's going on? My stomach twisted at the thought of doing that with some random chick right now. I shook my head. Nothing's going on. I'm just not feeling it tonight. I knew instantly that was the wrong thing to say. So, Declan said as he came closer, his stupid face suspicious, you just happened to be feeling a song that wasn't on our set list and made all of us go to bat with Roman for you, and now you're not feeling a meet and greet, where there's at least a dozen groupies ready to bounce on your dick as soon as you say the word. Not everything's about my dick, Declan, I said between gritted teeth. He just rolled his eyes. Since when? I huffed out a breath and walked past him. I don't have to answer to you. Does this have anything to do with the sexy pink-haired addition to our tour? He called after me. My steps faltered, and I knew that was enough of an answer for him. Look, bro, he said as he walked over and slapped me on the back. I know Dell is hot, but she's also really fucking cool and really fucking good. I don't want you to get her kicked off tour, 'cause you can't keep it in your pants. My stomach clenched at the thought of her having to go home because of me, and I shook my head again. That's not gonna happen. I'm just going back to the bus and going to sleep. Then what's in your hands? Leftovers. You know the fridge is broken. I'm gonna eat it before bed. You don't like to eat that late at night because it gives you weird dreams. I narrowed my eyes at him. When the fuck did you become my wife? Declan tossed his head back and laughed. You don't tour on and off with someone for 8 years and not learn some shit. Now tell me the truth. I sighed. I just thought I'd bring Dell something to eat because she didn't come to dinner with us. That's nice, Theo, he said with a slow nod. But since when are you nice? Fuck off, I said as I pushed past him. I'm serious, bro, don't fuck this up for her just so you can get your dick wet. That's not fair. I spun around and pinned him with a glare. You think I would risk her career just for a quick fuck? Declan's eyes were wide as he nodded slowly again. Yeah. The anger in the pit of my stomach was only tempered by the fact that I actually was the guy he was describing, at least before I met Dell. It's not like that, I growled. Declan shrugged. I hope not. I watched him for another second before spinning around and storming out of the bar. He wasn't my fucking boss and I didn't have to listen to him, even if what he was saying made sense. I did need to keep my hands off Dell, but that didn't mean I needed to keep my distance. Frankly, I had no faith that I'd even be able to stay away from her, which meant the only course of action was to keep things platonic, at least on the outside, because on the inside my heart was already racing at just the thought of seeing her again. Thankfully my Uber was at the curb and the drive back to the bus was short. Thanked the driver with some cash and jumped out as soon as he pulled to a stop. My luck continued when I found Eddie behind the wheel. I tapped on the glass and he opened the door with a smile. Hey Theo. Back early. Yeah. Is Dell already here? New girl? Yeah, she's in her room. Why did that simple sentence make my heart pound in my throat? I swallowed. Past the lump. Okay, thanks. He nodded, but his gaze was heavy as he watched me walk away. When I got to the back half of the bus where the bunks were, I closed the privacy curtain behind me, cutting off Eddie's penetrating stare. I looked down the hall to the door at the end and my heart raced faster. Get a grip, more, I muttered to myself before I started walking. I was just bringing her some dinner, but she wanted to talk for a few minutes. While she ate, that was okay too. Then I'd leave her alone and go to bed like I said I would. If touching her meant she could lose her spot on this tour, I'd find a way to keep my hands to myself, no matter how hard that seemed right now. I finally reached her door and lifted a fist to knock when I heard something. It was soft at first, and barely audible due to the soundproofing we'd done to the bus, but I could still hear it. I couldn't quite make out anything distinctive until her voice rose, and she cried out, "Help!" My hand was pulling the door handle in the next instant, ready to break it down if it was locked. Luckily it slid right open and I burst into the room, my eyes scanning the dark interior for danger. I spotted her curled up in the middle of the bed immediately but dragged my gaze away to assess the rest of the room. My heart was still slamming against my ribcage, but it began to slow as I confirmed there was no immediate danger. Please, she said again, and my eyes snapped to her. Help me. With another inspection of the room, I let out a breath, my shoulders finally relaxing. There was nothing wrong. Dell was fine, she was just having a nightmare. Somebody, she cried as she turned her head, and I got a look at the tears streaming down her face. Help me. I looked around the room again, but this time it wasn't for danger. It was for an answer. Dell was clearly upset. Her forehead was dotted with sweat, her cheeks damp with tears as she tossed and turned on the bed. But what was I supposed to do? Would she want me to wake her up? Did I even have the ability to make her feel better? Would this be breaking my promise to stay away? Don't leave, Dell whimpered as fresh tears leaked out of her eyes. Please. Don't go. My heart was crumbling in my chest as I watched her cry in her sleep. Finally. It was too much for me. I set her food down and took a seat on the edge of the mattress. Dell, I said. Softly. Wake up, darlin'. You're having a bad dream. She thrashed harder. Theo, she cried. My name falling from her lips like. That was so bittersweet it took my breath away. Please don't let him die. Before I could think too hard about it, I wrapped my fingers around her bicep and squeezed. Dell, wake up. Her eyes flew wide open before they darted around the room, landing on my face. Over and over. Finally, she said, Theo. I pulled my hand away and stood from the mattress, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this was. I heard you crying in here. I tried to explain. As I rubbed the back of my neck. I was just trying to wake you up. She watched me silently for a moment before squeezing her eyes closed and lying back on the pillow again. Sorry. That hasn't happened in a while. I watched her struggle to take deep, even breaths as her chest still heaved. Like she'd just run a marathon. I didn't know what I was supposed to do or what she expected of me. Was I supposed to stay? Should I leave? Do you want to talk about it? I finally asked, the uncertainty in my voice crystal clear. Dell sighed and opened her lids, meeting my gaze and damn near knocking me off my feet. Do you think it'll help? She finally asked, her voice so soft I could barely hear it. Her blue eyes swam with this endless grief that felt like it would tear right through my chest. I sat down on the mattress again, careful not to touch her. I don't think it can hurt. She closed her eyes and let out a deep breath. Okay, you're right. I watched as she breathed in and let it out slowly over and over before she finally spoke again. I was the one who found my father dying in our kitchen when I was 16, and I've had nightmares about it ever since. Shock froze me in place. Even my heart stopped beating for a moment while I tried to comprehend what she just confessed. Dell, I breathed. Holy shit. I'm so sorry. She bit her lip and nodded as tears filled her eyes again. Without thinking, I grabbed her hand and squeezed. How did he die? I asked softly. She let out a shaky breath. He and my mom were fated, so when she died, he died too. I didn't know which part of that sentence to focus on first because it was all so overwhelming. Your parents were fated? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dell only nodded, but it was all the answer I needed. Fated mates were so rare I'd never even met a pair. That probably had a lot to do with the fact I haven't lived in a pack since I was 10, but still. Finding your fated mate was a huge deal, and if the rumors were true, their kids were supposed to be more likely to find their match too. What if? You know what's even more fucked up? Dell asked with a watery chuckle. She looked up at me and her eyes were hard and shiny like sapphires. I just found out a few months ago that my uncle is the one who killed my mom, which also killed my dad. My jaw fell open as I stared at her. That's crazy, Delaware. I rubbed the back of my neck again. Hell, I thought my family was a mess. Her lips twitched once with a smile, but that was it before she looked away. And the sadness was back. Yeah, we've had a rocky year. My mind raced with ways to make her feel better, but nothing felt right. We're in this weird place where we've been as intimate as you could be without really knowing each other. Now, when tested with what to do for her, I felt unprepared. So I squeezed her hand until she met my eyes. What can I do? It was all I had to offer. I just had to hope it was enough. Dell let out an incredulous sound. Can you transport one of my sisters here to give me a hug? Because I feel like that's the only thing that would help right now. My heart pounded against my ribs again as I got ready to make her an offer. That would leave me completely vulnerable and at her mercy. I cleared my throat. No, I can't do that. But I could give you a hug. Dell's eyes snapped to mine, suddenly filled with enough heat to warm my entire body. Theo. I shook my head and held up my free hand. It's just a hug, I promise. When she still didn't look convinced, I added. My sister always says I give the best hugs in the world. Whenever she's sad, I'm the first person she comes to. And it always makes her feel better. Dell pursed her lips as she studied me. What makes these hugs of yours so great? I smiled then because I knew I had her. I scooted an inch closer. Well, I'm much bigger, so I'm able to really wrap my arms around you. Almost like a weighted blanket around a burrito. She tossed her head back and laughed, making my stomach twist. Is that all? She finally asked when the chuckles subsided. Of course not. I also have impeccable hygiene, so you know I'll smell good. Her smile was still wide as she shook her head. You just played a whole show. You probably smell like a gym sock. Hey, I changed my shirt. She rolled her eyes. Are you done? Because I'm not sure a smelly burrito hug is gonna make me feel better. It was my turn to laugh. I've also been known to throw in a soothing back rub. In special circumstances. Like what kind of circumstances? Like when a really pretty girl is really sad. The words shot out of my mouth. Before I could stop them and realize they were over the line. Not that they weren't true, but I wasn't supposed to say them out loud. Oh well. Dell smiled at me, but I could still see the shadows in her beautiful eyes. Think it'll help? She finally asked, her voice small. I slid another inch closer. I know it'll help. She let out a deep breath and held her arms open. Okay. I didn't waste a second before I pulled her against my chest and breathed her deep into my lungs. Her heart pounded just as hard as mine, but I didn't do anything but hold her. I wasn't going to let her get kicked off this tour. Hell, I wasn't even going to let her out of my sight. She'd effortlessly become such an important part of my life, and I was too tired of fighting to question it. I lifted a hand to her back and rubbed big circles like I'd promised. Dell sighed, relaxing further into my hold, and I had to squeeze my eyes shut as that small gesture rocked me to my core. We sat there quietly wrapped up in each other for the longest and shortest moment of my life. I knew this would be the last time I got to hold her until this tour was over, and I wanted to savor it. But Dell had other ideas. Why do I smell beef? I laughed and reluctantly pulled away. You're like a bloodhound, I said as I stood to retrieve her food. Or a werewolf, she deadpanned, and I chuckled again. I brought you dinner since you didn't come with us. Dell reached for the box even as she said, yeah, I just had a PBJ when I got back here. That's rabbit food. She rolled her eyes as she opened the container and shoved a couple fries in her mouth. I don't think rabbits eat peanut butter or grape jelly. They also don't talk with their mouths full, I said with another laugh. Dell rolled her eyes as she took a bite of the burger. You're the one who gave me the food. I shook my head, the smile still stretched across my face. If I'd known this was the consequence, I wouldn't have done it. She nodded slowly. Let this be a lesson for you, she said around another mouthful of food. Why did something that would be disgusting coming from anyone else make me laugh when it was from her? How did she have that power over me already? Dell swallowed and took a sip of the water next to her bed. You know this has to stop, right? Her voice was quiet and serious, and my heart dropped instantly. Yeah. No. No more kissing, no more notes, no more sneaking into my room with burgers in the middle of the night. I looked up at her with a frown. Wait, what? Theo. Good evening, Sir Edward. What say you on this fair night? Fuck, I said as I jumped to my feet. That's Declan. I crossed the room in 2 large steps but paused at the door and turned to her. I'm not gonna let you get kicked off this tour. I made her the promise I'd made myself. I'll give you your space and keep my hands to myself. But if you need me, I'm always here. Okay. She smiled, and it made my heart beat so hard I didn't know how the hell I'd ever keep my word. Okay, she finally said. And thanks for the food. There were so many things I wanted to say but couldn't. Instead I choked out, night, and slipped through her door into the hall. Before Declan could come back here, I crawled into my bunk and closed the curtain. I didn't want to see him or anyone else. I just wanted to be alone. With Dell's scent still on my clothes and her heartbeat close enough to listen to. That would just have to be enough for now. Chapter 18. Dell. That just might be the most romantic thing I've ever heard. I smiled and readjusted the phone against my ear. Yeah, it's really freakin' sweet. I mean, I told him not to write me any more notes, but I kinda like it. Is that bad? No. Evie yelled through the phone. It's adorable. My heart fluttered in my chest as I thought about all the sweet notes Theo had left me in the past few weeks. There was always one waiting for me after a show, and I looked forward to them every night. And it's not really breaking the rules, right? I said. Mason only said we couldn't hook up. Not that we couldn't communicate. Y'all have to communicate. You're on tour together. I nodded, letting my sister's confidence straighten my spine. Exactly. As just a couple notes, and it's not interfering with anything, so I don't see The problem? There is no problem. Okay, I said as I blew out a breath and stared up at the night sky. It was late, and we'd stopped at a Denny's somewhere outside Charlotte when Evie called me back. Good thing too, because having a private conversation on the bus was impossible. I thought it was hard keeping secrets in a pack, but that was nothing compared to living with all these werewolves on this tiny-ass bus. You couldn't even use the bathroom without everyone knowing your business. Declan actually had a chart and rated each of our bowel movements out of 10, which brought me to my next point. Men were disgusting. You'd think growing up with Abraham would have at least partially prepared me, but that was not the case. My brother was practically Mr. Clean compared to these slops. There were always dirty clothes all over the bus, the trash never got taken out, and don't even get me started on the state of the bathroom. But, for all their flaws, I was actually kinda growing attached to them. Well, most of them. Did you get another note last night? My sister asked, breaking me out of my thoughts. My stomach erupted in butterflies as I pulled the piece of paper out of my jeans. I usually kept all the notes hidden in my room, but I hadn't memorized this one yet. Yeah, I said. It says, I've never seen anything more beautiful. I've never heard music so sweet. Keep singing for me because it's all I get to keep. Evie sighed. It even rhymes. I smiled and shoved the note back in my pocket. I mean, he is a songwriter. Evie sighed again, louder this time. It's just so sweet. I don't know how y'all are still keeping your distance. We don't have a choice, Evie. It's just so unfair. This is the first guy you've ever really liked and you can't do anything about it. Like didn't feel like the right word to use anymore. Over the past 3 weeks I'd gotten to know Theo on a much deeper level, and every new thing I learned just made me like him more. Like how much of himself he gave to his fans. He was always the last one on the bus because he wanted to make sure he signed every poster and took a picture with every person there. Or how sweet he was to his sister. I'd overheard more than a couple hysterical calls from his twin, and he handled everyone with a level head and a calm voice. Then, of course, were all the little things he did for me when no one was watching. Like all the leftovers, he'd brought me home when I'd opted to not go out to eat. Or how he watched every one of my sets from backstage. Or how he never missed an opportunity to promote my SoundCloud to all his fans. I kept quiet and pretended like I didn't notice, but it was steadily adding up, and I was starting to lose count of all the reasons I liked him. It's only 5 more weeks, I reminded the both of us. That seems like forever. Sing it, sister, I muttered just as a loud bellow of familiar laughter echoed through the parking lot. I turned to find the guys streaming out of the restaurant and headed my way. Of course, I kept looking until I caught sight of Theo. His eyes met mine briefly, and he smiled, making my stupid heart pound in my chest. Hey, Evie, I said as I turned around so I could focus. I've gotta go. We're getting back on the bus. Okay, can't wait to see you tomorrow. As soon as I'd told my family we were playing in Charlotte the day before Thanksgiving, they'd all insisted on being there, even though that was over 2 hours drive from Asheville. I wish we were staying longer, but we've got a show in Atlanta on Tuesday, and Mason doesn't want to have to travel on Thanksgiving weekend, so we're leaving right after. We get it, Delaware. We're all just happy to get to see you. My eyes burned with tears that I furiously blinked back. Miss you, I finally choked out. I miss you too. We all do. Those last few words were enough to drive the tears away. I knew by we she meant Abraham, and I didn't want to talk about him. Evie had made it her mission to get us to make up, and she'd been nothing short of relentless. I knew she hated when any of us fought, but it just made me not want to pick up her calls. Okay, I gotta run. Love you, I said. Her faint reply sounded through the speaker just before I ended the call, and a little pang of guilt bit into me. Thankfully, I didn't have long to mope. Hey there, gorgeous. Are you ready to get your ass handed to you tonight? I rolled my eyes as Declan slung his arm around my shoulders and led me onto the bus. I'm ready to get your head checked for these delusions you're having. He laughed, but the sound was drowned out by my pounding heart as Theo climbed onto the bus. I ducked out of Declan's hold as quickly as I could without offending him. I know I had no responsibilities to him, but I'd seen the way Theo's face creased when Declan got too friendly with me, and I was trying to avoid a confrontation at all costs. Hell, if Mason wanted to kick me off the tour for kissing Theo, imagine how pissed he'd be if 2 members of his band got into a fight over me. I was certain I'd be on the next bus home to Asheville. You really haven't beaten her yet? Theo said, and I couldn't stop my eyes from jumping to his. They held me captive for a long moment before Declan spoke up and broke the spell. Listen, it's all a game of odds and I'm just waiting for the right time to make my move. I laughed. Yeah, odds are you'll never win a game against me. Declan narrowed his eyes as he pulled the cards out of the game cabinet. Fine. Let's go. Shuffle 'em up and deal 'em out, baby. I didn't miss the way Theo stiffened at the pet name but kept my gaze away from him as I took the cards from Declan. Are you sure about this? I asked, as I broke the deck and started mixing them up. You almost cried when I beat you earlier. There was something in my eye. Even Roman chuckled as he walked past, and that dude hardly ever even smiled. All right, is everyone here? Mason called as he climbed onto the bus. I have some good news and some bad news. Mason, I just found out my favorite bachelorette got kicked off this week. Really can't take any more tonight. The bus fell silent as the manager stared at Declan like he was an insect on his windshield he was trying to identify. Finally it was too much for me, and a giggle escaped. Everyone's eyes swung my way and my cheeks heated, but I couldn't stop laughing. Declan appreciated my humor while Roman rolled his eyes and the twins ignored me. But it was Theo's crooked smile and bright hazel eyes from across the bus that I couldn't look away from. Anyway, Mason said, breaking the moment between us, there's been a problem with the venue, I guess. Theo's familiar ringtone drowned out the rest of Mason's words, and the manager frowned as he fished his phone out of his pocket. Sorry, I need to take this, he mumbled as he stood up. Is that your sister? Mason asked, even though we all knew it was. Yeah, Theo said. Why? She might as well be here for this news since I'm sure it'll affect her too. Theo sat back down, brows bunched with confusion. Okay, he said slowly. Hey Lou, Mason has news I guess, he muttered into the phone. So like I was saying, there's a problem with the venue. They had a small fire in their electrical room and apparently it's going to take days to fix. Tomorrow's show has to be cancelled, but we have the option to stay till Sunday and play then if we want. So what you're saying is we get the night off? Declan said. Wait, Theo interrupted. Do all the ticket holders for tomorrow get a new ticket to Sunday, or a refund at least? My heart warmed my chest, and I had to look down before someone could see it. In my eyes. Of course Theo would ask about his fans. Of course he'd be worried about being fair to them. Yes, Mason said, and I looked back up at him. If they want a refund, they'll get it either way. Their other option is to use their ticket for the show on Sunday if we decide to stick around and do that. Does it fuck up anything else in the schedule? Roman asked. Mason shook his head. We had this weekend off anyway. The next show isn't until Tuesday night. The lead singer shrugged and leaned back in his chair. I'm down. What are we gonna do in Charlotte until Sunday? Sawyer piped up. Mason shrugged. Get a hotel room and sleep in? Catch a flight back home? Your call, guys. Are we going through with the Sunday show? The rest of the bus agreed and Mason nodded. Okay, I'll give the venue a call, he said before turning around to bury his face in his phone. Does that mean you're coming home? A little voice said, and Theo immediately stood up and walked to the back of the bus. I didn't watch him leave, but I listened carefully until Declan started talking. Well, this sucks. What the fuck am I gonna do in Charlotte? Learn how to play a card game you're actually good at? I suggested as I dealt. I could feel Declan's narrowed gaze on me, but I kept my eyes on the table. What are you gonna do, Pinky? Probably stay at my sister's, I said with a shrug. Does she live in Charlotte? Yeah, she's the alpha of that pack. Declan whistled. Damn, so she must have a big house. Huge. Then there should be room for me. Can I come with you? What? I asked, but I wasn't the only one. I turned to find Theo standing in front of the privacy curtain, hands fisted at his sides. His fiery eyes darted from Declan to me and back again before I finally turned away. What? Declan said, hands in the air like he was surrendering. I don't wanna spend Thanksgiving in a hotel. What's the big deal? Can we come too? Walker spoke up for himself and his brother. I glanced back at Theo to see him glaring at them now too. I'll have to ask. But I don't see why not. My hand started to sweat as I licked my lips. Do you want to come too, Roman? Theo. That was the first time I'd said his name out loud in 3 weeks, and I knew. The moment he met my eyes again he knew that too. It almost sounded strange, coming out of my mouth, which was weird because it ran through my head all day. I'll pass, Roman said predictably before he got up and walked back to the bunks. I turned to Theo and watched his Adam's apple bob with a harsh swallow. I can't, he finally said. I promised my sister I'd come home. My stomach sank, but I should have known that already. I couldn't expect him to choose coming to my sister's house for Thanksgiving over being able to see his own family. So I pulled my lips into a smile and shrugged. Okay. I turned to Declan, Sawyer and Walker. I'll get in touch with my sister and make sure it's okay. But I'm sure she'll say yes. The twins nodded and got up to go play video games, but Declan continued to stare at me. Finally he said, "Aren't you gonna call your sister?" "Yes," I said slowly. He continued to stare. I rolled my eyes. "Would you like me to do that now?" Declan smiled wide, and I wondered for the dozenth time why he had such bad luck with women. "Listen, Del, my social calendar fills up fast. If you want me at Thanksgiving, you need to make plans with me now." I rolled my eyes even harder. "I don't remember saying I wanted you at Thanksgiving," I grumbled as I stood to go retrieve my phone. "Del, dear, let's not argue semantics." I turned around to shoot him a glare that bounced right off his thick skull. Never in my life had I ever met anyone as equally endearing and annoying. Declan Holmes was, thankfully, one of a kind. My phone was charging in my room, which meant I'd have to walk past Theo to get there. He stood his ground like a damn goalie guarding the net, and I slowed as I approached. Just as I thought I'd have to come to a stop and ask him to move, he stepped out of the way. I held my breath as I walked past, knowing full well what his scent would do to me if I breathed it in. "Del," he said, just as I thought I was free from his soulful gaze and deep voice. "Yeah," I said as I reluctantly spun around. Theo was staring at the ground, his jaw clenched before he finally dragged his gaze to mine. "I'm sorry I can't go to your sister's for Thanksgiving." It felt like he was trying to say more than that, but in front of so many people it was impossible for me to know. I tried to swallow, but my throat was bone dry. "It's okay. I want to go," he rushed to add, and I could already feel my cheeks warming with a blush. "But I can't. Louisa's already got her heart set on me comin' home." I shook my head. "I totally get it. If I told my sister I was coming home and then canceled, she'd skin me." Theo's face broke out into a smile so beautiful I almost had to look away. "You talkin' about Evie?" I jerked back in surprise before a laugh fell out of my mouth. "Yeah, exactly." He nodded. "I believe it." We stood there staring at each other for just a moment too long before I cleared my throat and looked away. "Okay, I should go call my sister." Yeah, of course. Go ahead." With a Herculean effort, I turned around and walked away from him and those eyes that had been haunting my best dreams for weeks. Maybe some time apart was exactly what we needed.